And with the mention of these stablecoins, who better to join us than someone who has helped implement a way to transfer value without stablecoins where an unbanked population lives using Bitcoin. So joining us to discuss is Bitcoin Beach Director Michael Peterson. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, great to be on here with you guys.
Yeah, glad to have you. So Bitcoin Beach, it's an important project in the Bitcoin ecosystem. What is your quick elevator pitch on what Bitcoin Beach is and why is it so special?
Bitcoin Beach is really the first circular economy where Bitcoin is used as it was meant to be, as money. And so we rolled out in a small community where most people have traditionally been underserved or not in the banking system at all, and showed them for the first time how they can connect to the global monetary network using the world's best money. And now, rather than having to even try to worry about, jumping through all the hoops to get into the traditional banking system, they can freely, without any gatekeepers, send money around the world, receive money from relatives in the US, and within the country have access to digital payments for the first time ever. But I think even more importantly, they can save in a currency that is not just going down in value. Historically, in places like El Salvador, people haven't had really any option and so because of that, you would see very little saving or thinking about the future. They would kind of spend it as quickly as they got it. Or if they did save, it'd be more like buying a bunch of concrete blocks because they knew they would cost more in a year than they cost now, and so that was kind of their form of saving. And so with access to Bitcoin for the first time, they really can think long-term and plug into the global economy.
Right. We talk about Bitcoin as a savings technology, and it seems like that is what you might be plugging into there. And we talk a lot about price on the show, you kind of mentioned it a little bit there as a way for these people in El Salvador to save. But in your experience, do the people who live in Bitcoin Beach stare longingly at the charts like we do at CoinDesk, or are they just more excited about actually being banked and having access to basic financial tools now?
Actually, price is not a huge focus for people who are concerned about volatility. A lot of them will use some of the stable products that are out there. The Chivo wallet here in El Salvador has the ability for them to hold in dollars but still access the Bitcoin payment rails. They can also use Strike. And then more recently, the Bitcoin Beach wallet, which just switched its name to Blink, had introduced the stable sats, which allows them to peg to the dollar, but still have all the freedom and access that Bitcoin payment rails give them.
Could you talk a little bit about stable sats? You kind of mentioned it in passing. Is that something you guys are working on Bitcoin Beach, or is that with some other company that's helping you out?
Yeah, so that's actually being rolled out by Galloy. They're the developers and the masterminds behind the Bitcoin Beach wallet, which is now the Blink wallet, and they have developed a way basically to hedge the volatility and lock in the dollar value in a way that doesn't have to trust any banks or worry about that aspect of it. So it's a product that's pretty revolutionary, and I think we're going to see more people moving to similar type products.
Sure. So Michael, what do you say to people like me, I've said this sometimes, who have characterized Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador as antithetical to Bitcoin's ethos, since it was made possible through a legal tender law where the government made sure that people were to accept Bitcoin, versus somewhere in Africa where people use Bitcoin when their government doesn't actually want them to? What do you say to people when they bring that criticism to you?
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism for people to bring up, especially if people haven't spent any time in El Salvador, that they might really not understand how it did develop here. But it really was something that was grassroots that grew in El Zonte, which is, a lot of people know as Bitcoin Beach. And it was really the poorest people, the people at the bottom of the economic ladder, that were the first ones to adopt Bitcoin. And the government legal tender law was really just a follow-on to that made sure that the banks and the other legal apparatus wouldn't get in the way of that continued adoption. And the initial law, they talked about requiring people to accept Bitcoin, but they've never really enforced that. That's not the reality on the ground. If businesses want to accept Bitcoin, they do, and those that don't. And we're seeing more and more, even businesses that they might not have an interest in Bitcoin per se, but they're starting to FOMO in now because they're realizing they're losing out on sales or losing out on customers as more and more people flood into El Salvador and are looking to set up their lives here.
Yeah, I guess maybe a good critique to my critique is maybe you should come visit if that is part of your answer.
Hey, we would love to have you here. You know, it's I think it's orange washing season. You know, after all the shit coins and blow-ups this last year, people are starting to get back to the roots of what Bitcoin was supposed to be. So we invite people to really come down and judge for yourself.
Sure. We would love to send someone from CoinDesk down there maybe someday. So this is a grassroots community, a grassroots movement. Is this the best path forward for Bitcoin and adoption? And in believing that, have you helped other projects get off the ground? Is there some sort of framework you guys have put in place so you can help other communities get off the ground? Because there's only one of you, Michael. You can't be jumping around, going to Brazil, going to Paraguay, and setting up a bunch of places, right?
Well, this last year I've been to South Africa, I've been to Brazil, I've been to Peru. So we actually are working. There's a number of other grassroots projects doing amazing things. Bitcoin Akasi in South Africa is one of my favorite. You know, working in a township in a community that has really historically been excluded from everything. And now they're leading the way in South Africa. There's exciting things in Peru and Brazil and Guatemala. And so this past year, we released a white paper that basically set out the principles of what Bitcoin Beach was trying to achieve and shared, you know, kind of the roadmap of what we use, what worked and didn't. And we're seeing really dozens of communities spring up around the world. And I really do think that that is going to be what drives adoption rather than, you know, the top-down government adoption. I think they're both going to come together, and I think they're both important, but I think it's going to be really the grassroots that are the main driver.
Right. I know this isn't your main focus, but I want to ask about the US because I'm selfish and I live in the US. Do you think that these types of circular economies that you're talking about, which need to pop up because of lack of access to banking services, can crop up in places like the US and coexist with the banking system we have here? Or does that sort of defeat the purpose of Bitcoin? Do you think that we could have that in the US, or is it going to just happen everywhere else in the world and come here eventually?
I think it will happen in the U.S. I think we're already starting to see it happen in certain ethnic populations. I think, you know, Salvadorans in the U.S. now are very much aware of Bitcoin, and there's, I think, 50% of the Salvadorans in the world actually live in the U.S. There's a huge proportion of the population that's in the U.S. And so I think we're going to see pockets like that, people who have traditionally really been kept out of the U.S. banking system. And I think it's going to slowly spread from there. You know, there's obvious hiccups with the way the tax law is and the way that you have to claim capital gains and the tracking nightmare of spending Bitcoin in the U.S. that is going to hold things back until the government fixes that aspect. But I think in these other communities that have really been locked out of the traditional banking system, it's already happening in the U.S.
Right. Interesting take. I like that. In your opinion, you're someone who's on the ground in El Salvador and many other places, as you've mentioned. I have trouble with this. What is the most difficult part in getting used to thinking about Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, or as a unit of account, rather? How many sats does a pupusa cost? I don't know, but I know it should probably be 30 cents. I don't know. That feels right. How is getting used to that working in El Salvador? And even you're someone who is back and forth from the US and El Salvador. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think the actually using Satoshis as a unit of account is, if we're going to be honest, that's going to be the thing that takes the longest to take place. You know, we're used to thinking of dollars as Americans. And so, you know, I still am guilty of that, of doing that conversion in my mind, you know, back and forth and thinking in dollars rather than sats. Obviously, for bigger purchases, when you're thinking about properties or cars, it's much easier to think in terms of, hey, do I want to spend this much Bitcoin on that? Because, you know, you have that that lost opportunity of seeing what we think is going to be the appreciation long term. So for bigger purchases, I think we're going to see it happen first. And you see that in places like Argentina, where they will price certain elements in dollars. When it comes to real estate or cars, they'll always price them in dollars. Where it's anything smaller, they'll price it in pesos. And so I think we'll see something similar with Bitcoin happen in El Salvador and other places that choose to adopt it.
Awesome. Understood, Michael. Michael, that's all the time we have for you today. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to new products, new Bitcoin beaches, and maybe a Bitcoin mountain someday.
Yeah, well, you got to come down and visit. You got to see for yourself.
I can't complain about it unless I've been there, right? Thanks,
All right,
Michael.
we'll keep the light on for you here.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
All right, see ya.
That was Bitcoin Beach Director Michael Peterson.